Welcome, everyone. My name is Paul Revere, and I'm the chairman of the board of Siloam Family Health Center. It's been a great pleasure to serve these many years, and thrilled to have you here tonight to enjoy this special offering. Let's begin with prayer. Our Father, we're grateful for this setting, this place. Thank you for these friends who gathered to hear a special conversation. We thank you, and we're mindful that as we sit here tonight, we're not fearful of military intervention or intimidation, that we are meeting in peace without social unrest, and yet we know we're considering serious issues that face our country, our land. And so we ask for your perspective and your wisdom as we hear the comments of our guests. And may we have ears to hear, and may we be actors who choose to take action upon what we've heard here tonight. It's in these things, in all of these things we ask in your name. Amen. We want to welcome Andrew Peterson.
Good to be here with you guys. My name is Andrew Peterson. This is two of my dear friends, Andy Gullahorn and Ben Shive. We give them a big hand, please. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys. I have this theory when I do concerts. My theory is that there's at least some small percentage of the audience was dragged there against their will. They're sitting in the audience wondering, how in the world did I end up at this concert? What am I doing here? And actually, the roles are a little bit reversed tonight. I keep asking myself, how in the world did I end up doing this thing tonight? So I'm really grateful, and this felt like kind of an appropriate song. So here goes nothing.
If you'll step inside this great glass elevator, it'll take us up above the city lights to where the planet curves away to the equator. I want to show you something fine. You can see the roads that we all travel just to get here. A million minuscule decisions in a line. Why they brought us to this moment isn't clear, but that's alright. We've got all night. Well, could it be that the many roads you took to get here were just for me to tell this story, and for you to hear this song and your many hopes and your many fears were meant to bring you here all along. So if you'll trust me with your time, I'll spend it wisely, and I will send you with all I have to give. 'Cause if you traveled all this way, then I will do my best to play my biggest hits that don't exist. And if you lend to me your ear, I'll sing and pray. And I will never ever sing them out of tune. And I will not forget the words of any chorus, bridge, or verse. I promise you. 'Cause it could be that many roads you took to get here, just for me to tell this story, and for you to hear this song and your many hopes and your many fears were meant to bring me here. Oh, 'cause we've got Benjamin to play that grand piano. Well, if we're lucky, it's a little louder too. We've got Andy on the guitar.
Thank you. Well, I grew up in a little town mostly in North Florida. I was born in Illinois, in central Illinois. My dad's a preacher, and when I was 7 years old, he announced to our family that we were moving to Florida. And as a 7-year-old, what I thought he was telling us was that we were moving to Disney World, and or the beach maybe, But most people maybe don't realize that Florida is mostly alligators and swamps and guys with big trucks. And so I was this very Midwestern boy with no accent, thrust into the kind of the wilds of North Florida. And I just read an article a couple days ago about Florida, how a guy pulled over to look at the alligator on the side of the road and was bit by a poisonous snake hiding under his car. So that doesn't happen in Illinois. And so I most of my childhood has been this long process of deciphering like what happened to me, being suddenly a Southerner, a Midwesterner growing up in the South. So I spent most of my youth wanting to run away from this little town called Lake Butler, Florida. And Lake Butler is the home of Florida State Prison. So most of the people in the town are either employed by or incarcerated by the prison. And my mom worked for the prison system for years and years, and most of my friends were farmers or whatever. But I just wanted to escape. I wanted to get out of town. So since I couldn't drive yet, I escaped into books. And so I was always reading Narnia and Lord of the Rings and Tom Sawyer and whatever. Anywhere I was reading about was better than where I was, right? And so I ended up trying to run away from home a couple times in high school. And in my part of the South, what we always ate was casseroles, which means that, I don't know how it is for you guys, but for me it was you take any ingredient you want and then add 2 cans of cream of mushroom soup and and then put something crunchy on top and bake it at 350 for 20 minutes. And so you can subsist for your whole life on that kind of food. And so whenever I ran away from home, I would fill my backpack with cream of mushroom soup and strike out alone. And I would always come home the same night. I'd get scared and come home. But that idea that the only way to really find a good life was to get away persisted through most of my youth. And then I remember when I got married, I stood at the altar watching my beautiful bride walk down the aisle. And I was 20 years old. I was a sophomore in college when we got married. And one of the many thoughts in my head, along with all the other great thoughts, one of the thoughts was, well, so much for a life of adventure. I'm settling down and I'm putting down roots and I'm going to kind of just slow down. And I kind of grieved that a little bit. And after 20 years of marriage, almost, I've realized that I was completely mistaken. That if you want adventure and if you want richness in your life, you don't have to look any farther than the person you're married to or the children growing up under your roof or your community or your church. That's where like the adventure lies, the danger and the beauty and all of it. And I think I learned that because of a book called Jayber Crow. And so I finished reading Jayber Crow and wept on the floor of my office for about an hour and realized that the same thing that I felt when I read C.S. Lewis books, when I read about Narnia and I longed for Aslan's country, was the same thing that was piqued whenever I read Mr. Berry's works. And it was this longing for a home that I kind of feel like I was made for. And so I have begun since the work of kind of like building that home around me and in my own community. And so I'm thankful to you for that. So this is a song that I wrote about that, and it is it's a song that was inspired by the fact that after living in Nashville for 17 years, just a few years ago, I found out that there was a cave system underneath my neighborhood. And I went spelunking in it and found a pond and a waterfall and a little guy with a ring that lived in the back of it. But anyway, I climbed out of the cave that day and found out how to finish this song. So here you go. Well,
I grew up in a little town, a southern mix of lost and found, where most folks seem to stick around. But I could hear the highway song. I'd sit out on the dock till dawn and dream about the great beyond. I dreamed that I was a world traveler, set me loose to find my way. Just get me out on the road someday with my sails unfurled. So many mysteries I wanted to unravel if I could travel the world. enough, I had my way. I saw the world the Lord has made, mostly from the interstate. Oh, but I had hardly seen a thing until I gave that golden ring to the one who gave her heart to me. And I became a world traveler. Well, that's the day I hit the road. I walk the hills of the human soul of a tender girl. I'm a world traveler. She opened the gate and took my hand, led me into the mystic land where her galaxies swirl. So many mysteries I never will unravel, but I want to travel her world. Take a left at the end of my street, just a few doors down, up the hill and into the trees. There's a hole in the ground where we traveled the cavern so deep. We wandered the wonder so wide, it was right beneath our feet. All this time, all this time. So tonight I saw the children in their rooms, little flowers all in bloom, burning suns and silver moon. And somehow in those starry skies, the image of the Maker lies right here beneath my roof tonight. So hold on tight, I'm a world traveler. So pack your bags and dig down deep, ride the storms and sail the seas to the distant poles. I'm a world traveler into these uncharted lands, to blaze a trail in the vast expanse of the heart and soul. In the grace of the God of peace, let's wade to the battle. So come on with me and get up in that saddle. There's a million mysteries I'm ready to unravel. So come on, let's travel the world. I want to travel the world. Come on with me now.
Gurung family. Yeah, they are a Bhutanese refugee family from Nepal. So we are picking them for Siloam. Namaste. तपाईको सिलोममा appointment छ आज?
तेरो दुई घर आएको छ तर उनीहरु यहाँ सरेकै छैन. हामी मात्रै छौं.
They came here on January the 15th, and they are saying they did not like it before because there was no other Nepali family nearby. But soon, yeah, they are getting used to with the apartment and they are liking it now. It's good for them.
So we have 35 total refugees today, 16 are children.
And then thank you, Sukran.
Masalama.
Masalama.
Thank you, shukran.
Sukran.
We have a family from the Congo, from Burma.
You all can just sit right.
And then we have another family from Bhutan.
Everyone you've seen this morning has come to the United States not by choice, but because they were forced to leave the country of origin. Many of them have been living in camps for months or even years, sometimes decades. So in addition to disease and hardship and hunger, they're bringing all the hopes of their families to start afresh in a new society. And we get to be that opening welcome to many of them to help them taste what might be possible for them in this country.
What grabs me, they take the chance and they come and they're looking for something to restore their life, which they've never had. I mean, this family, living in a refugee camp for 15 years, I can't imagine. I can't imagine. It's an ordinary day for us, but it's a monumental day for them.
This is just the first part of their medical health screening process as they enter into the U.S. Most of them have probably only been here for a month or less. It's very intimidating to be in a clinic like this with so many people and so many different languages, and we're asking questions about your medical health, and I'm sure it's very scary.
So this blood pressure 150/90 is a little too high. I think there's a reason to be tense right now.
This is our country, Bhutan. This is the smallest one. What I'm trying to say is you are a long way from our country, Bhutan. Now you are in States, United States.
My job is to talk to you about your emotions and your mental health. How many years were you in the camp in Nepal?
22 years.
22 years. It's a very long time. Do you have any worries about your new life here?
I have a language barrier.
Yes.
So that's the problem.
Were you aware of this?
Oh my gosh, no. Nope, didn't know that.
So do you think they're aware of that?
Probably not. Can I talk to her by herself?
Would that be okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'll use an interpreter and
Yeah.
her into a room.
Yeah. Wow, okay. Yeah, we just got a lab result back on a patient that we didn't know that kind of changes some of the things we need to do. And I don't know if the patient knows about her results, so. Whenever you have to tell someone something that they don't already know, there's this hope. Please tell me they already know this and I'm not the one that tells them, but I was the one. Jesus, I thank you so much for this family. I think what I can offer the patient in the moment of delivering bad news is also a kind heart and a gentle voice and affirmation that we will help you through this. You're not alone. Jesus, I thank you for how you've protected them and how you brought them to America. And Lord, I thank you for the good things that you have in store for them. And I think those things help me to feel like I'm giving something, even if I can't fix the situation for the person. And I ask all this in Jesus' name. Sorry. You're welcome. God bless you.
Toothbrushes, toothpaste.
I love that we're some of the first faces that they see when they walk into the U.S.
And this is dental floss.
That we're able to walk into a room and say, welcome to the U.S. We're so glad you're here. We hope that you love your life here. And we know that it's going to be hard at first, but we're here to help you transition.
Have the words in their language.
I think they just really appreciate that they can come here for their physical care, but they also find some emotional and spiritual relief as well.
We're very glad you're here, and we pray God will richly bless your new life.
I hope that each patient who comes through these doors knows that God loves them deeply, personally, and practically. And at Siloam, we try to leverage the generosity of this community to share that love with each patient who's arriving from another country.
I'm like,
Good evening. My name is Jim Henderson. I'm the medical director at Siloam, and just got to say, it is an incredible privilege for me to be here tonight. I'm a new fan of WendellBerry, but I'm a very old fan of Adrian Peterson, so thank you both. I've seen that video, I guess, 4 times now, and it's a little bit hard to watch without crying. Sorry for that, but it's our everyday life. It's not ordinary, it's everyday. And I think I was okay till I saw Rebecca stop. This was totally, unscripted, and watched her walk into that situation. And last 2 times I've seen it, I think I had a little bit of a feeling of hopelessness, thinking about a man and his family who've come through all that they've come through, Central Africa, the horrors of Congo, and then to hear more bad news. But today, watching that, I saw something I didn't see before. I saw the man sitting beside Rebecca as she prayed, and I saw his tears, and I saw his thankfulness, and I realized something really special. In her grief, in her sadness, Rebecca was trying to comfort them and going to the only source she knew, and he gave it back. And I saw 2 people comforting each other with the comfort they had within them. And I realized right there, 2 people whose hopes were anchored in something far stronger than their circumstances were fellowshipping together. And that's what Siloam is. So it's a real privilege to watch that. Now, Siloam was created to be a different kind of medical center, one conceived in the love of Jesus and commissioned to serve those who are suffering and who fall through the gaps in our healthcare system. And that's Siloam. Now, immigrants and foreign-born refugees are some of our most obviously needy patients, but Siloam also exists to address the needs of our own neighbors. I've counted them. Nearly 10,000 refugees have come through our doors in the 8 years since I've begun working at Siloam, but we've had at least 10 times as many encounters with others, just like you and me, regular folks. Some have lost their jobs, some have been displaced from their own families here in the U.S. and from their communities. And like the refugees, many have factors in their lives that are beyond their control. Now, those who know me know I love to tell stories, but unfortunately, Morgan has told me I can't tonight. But I figured a way out of this mess. If you work at Siloam or have ever worked or volunteered at Siloam, would you stand up now? Ruth, others? Sydney? Thank you. So look around you, my new friends. Between us, we have hundreds of stories that will encourage you, real stories, and I encourage any of you to seek somebody out that you saw stand and go up to them tonight before you leave. I hope you can hear at least one of their stories. Now, for 22 years, our staff and these wonderful volunteers have been faithfully living out our original calling, which is to share the love of Christ by serving those in need through healthcare. Now, all this work has been built on the labors of love offered by our founders, our wonderful board, and our previous CEO, Nancy West. Is Nancy here tonight? Oh. People went out from their 4 walls and from their places of work and their everyday lives, and they pursued the hurting, and they sought to bring them excellent health care. Now, this year, Allison, the nurse with the longer hair you saw in the video, and our other nurses, Ahmed and Sam, Naomi, Janet, and others, they have begun going out under the direction of our nurse manager, Claire Reagan, and they're going out to communities to find those who can't come in. There's a lot of people hurting out there. It is a privilege to work with a team like this. Now, Dr. Morgan Wills, some of you, I think a lot of you know, is a friend, a physician, a father of a track star, I hear, and he's a practical theologian and an educator. He also happens to be our new CEO. Now, Morgan has encouraged us to stay the course and to deliver the most excellent whole person care possible to as many of the needy Nashvillians as possible during our trying economic times. But maybe more importantly, Morgan has encouraged us to always consider what whole person care really is. Now, as a part of that task, Morgan has introduced us to the writings of WendellBerry. It has been a great gift to start now, late in life, to read the works of a man who combines such genuine faith with his wisdom and his insight. But I have to say this, it's an even greater privilege for me to work with someone like Morgan who embodies these very same traits but walks them out with humility in my life every day. Our whole staff has been blessed to have him. Morgan?
Gracious introduction, Jim, as usual. I believe you forgot one of my titles, though, Farmer-in-Chief. So if this farmer is a little sweaty right now, it's because I just ran back from the track where my son just had his personal record in the mile in the league championship. So we'll see if we can make it back out for the 800. Okay, true confessions. I know it will shock most of you, but I'm really not much of a farmer. The truth is, I'm a child of the suburbs. I live in a city. It took me the better part of 2 or 3 decades to learn to eat vegetables, let alone raise them. Yeah, that's the truth. But after reading the work of WendellBerry and meeting him today, I've come to the conclusion, I'll put my pitchfork up, that Siloam is a kind of family farm of health centers. What do I mean by that? Well, as Wendell often reminds those who romanticize the idea of moving back to the land, farming is really hard work, and so is healthcare for the poor, especially without insurance reimbursement. The work has always been hard, but in the era of so-called healthcare reform, there's some new, unexpected challenges. You see, Siloam functions as a sort of medical foster home for the uninsured, a sometimes temporary, sometimes long-term respite for those who fall through the cracks of the healthcare system. Yet many harbor the illusion that with all the changes, there won't be any problem with the uninsured anymore. And the truth is far different than that. According to the best projections, there will continue to be well over 100,000 uninsured in Middle Tennessee alone, even with Medicaid expansion. The line to become a new patient at Siloam is already out the door. Throw in the challenge of communicating in 70 different languages, even if Jim speaks 30 of them, and it becomes quite a challenge, maybe like digging a fence post. Siloam is like a traditional family farm in another sense, too. As Wendell has eloquently explained in his writing, and many of our immigrant patients intuitively understand, a subsistence farm with its diversity of crops, animals, laborers, and fields is an intact, living ecosystem. It's not far off the mark to say the same thing about Siloam. Not only are we a vital part of Nashville's larger safety net for healthcare, but Siloam itself exists as an intricate web of 35 staff, 300 volunteers, some of which you saw tonight, dozens of churches and community partners, and roughly 5,000 patients annually. Hopefully you caught a glimpse of that extended Siloam family in the video you saw tonight. For the whole organism to flourish, to be healthy, each member in our partnership depends upon the others. It's a mutual appreciation for this sense of health as membership in a community that first drew me to the work of WendellBerry. Judging from the looks of our weed-infested garden in our backyard, I obviously still have a lot to learn about the nitty-gritty of agriculture. But my experience at Siloam has helped me to grasp the basic premise that health is wholeness. This wholeness is not freedom from bodily imperfections or dependence upon others. It's a life of sound relationships within our organ systems, yes, but also with others, with the creation itself, and ultimately with the Creator himself. Siloam's mission is to share the love of Christ by serving those in need through healthcare. In this sense, Siloam is an operational arm of God's gathered people, where the spiritual and physical are knit back together in very practical ways. Yet it's also one where patients and volunteers of all faiths or none feel surprisingly welcome and at home. I believe that one reason people from such diverse backgrounds are attracted to Siloam is our commitment to do excellent work. We certainly don't do it perfectly, but at Siloam, we believe that the poor deserve first-rate care just as much as anyone else, and all the more so when there's a cross on the wall. I'll always remember the words of one of my mentors at Vanderbilt Medical School: Christian shoddy is still shoddy. Dr. Tarpley, are you here somewhere? I think he may be. Taking this maxim to heart, we seek to honor our patients by recruiting teammates whose passion for ministry is equally matched by skill at their craft. Clinical excellence does not mean doctor-centered care either. On the contrary, whole person care is best delivered as a team. At Siloam, that includes behavioral health, pharmacy, social work, pastoral care, and now nurse-led community health. Our staff providers know and respect their limits, seeking to align the right resource with the right need at the right time. It's the kind of care I think we would all want our loved ones to have. We like to call it concierge medicine for the poor. One of my passions and the impetus behind the Siloam Institute is to expose a new generation of healthcare practitioners to this upside-down vision of healthcare. We call it ruining students for careers in medicine as usual. I also like the phrase Wendell used today when we visited the clinic, deprogramming. 2 months ago, a visiting fourth-year student named Lauren got successfully deprogrammed on her Siloam rotation. She arrived jaded from a rushed and impersonal experience on the hospital wards, but soon became enchanted by the experience of whole-person healthcare for the poor, both its rewards and its challenges. In the process, she rediscovered a calling. Here's a brief excerpt from a reflection she wrote at the end of her rotation. While the providers at Siloam work with very limited resources and sometimes have to alter their plan of care accordingly, the care they provide in many ways far exceeds the care I've seen in more technically rich environments. Siloam clinicians take a personal interest in all aspects of their patients' lives, tailoring care to their unique resources, beliefs, and fears. Patients understand that the clinic is not going to ask them to contribute more than they can afford, but at the same time, the patients understand they must be invested in their own care. This is exactly the type of medicine I hope to one day practice. Lauren smelled something different at Siloam, and it gnawed at her. And as a result, she somewhat selfishly pestered us to discover what made it such a health-promoting environment. There are many possible answers for that question, but the practical answer, our dirty little secret, is this: Siloam exists because of the generosity of this community. Even with a debt-free facility, assistance from volunteers, and judicious use of resources, patient contributions only cover 10% of our costs. We rely on generous gifts gathered in forums like this, our lone annual fundraiser, to cover the difference. Speaking of gifts, we are extremely blessed tonight to enjoy the company of not just one, but two very generous men. To introduce them, I would like to call upon my friend, colleague, and Siloam board member, Dr. Keith Metter. Keith, you can start walking up whenever you're ready. Keith is a Kentucky native whose education and professional life led him first to Vanderbilt, then to Duke, and most recently back to Vanderbilt again. Trained in both psychiatry and theology, he serves as the director for the Vanderbilt Center for Biomedical Ethics and Society. Basically, Keith was interdisciplinary before interdisciplinary was cool. It was about 9 months ago that I leaned over to Keith at a dinner party and wondered out loud, do you think WendellBerry would consider coming down for our fundraiser next year? Little did I know what I was setting in motion. Over the following months, Keith latched onto this challenge like Burley Coulter on a coon hunt. He also helped us to envision a full-blown weekend of activity that includes a follow-up session tomorrow entitled Food and Faith, a Matter of Health and Wholeness, This forum, held at St. George's Episcopal Church, will be free and open to the public, a gift back to the Nashville community. After all, not everyone was fortunate enough to get a ticket for tonight's event. So thank you, Keith, for your perseverance and your patience. It's hard enough working with a rookie CEO and a shoestring budget, let alone a guest speaker who refuses to use email on principle. It wouldn't have come together without you.
Morgan's just trying to cover up my bald head, but there are many things we share with WendellBerry. Morgan and I share a bald head with him, too. It is a great privilege to introduce both of our participants in this evening's interview. WendellBerry's work has formed me for many years and continues to challenge me. Students that I've taught at Duke and Vanderbilt would bear witness to my conviction that his book, Hannah Coulter, is a gift to us all that should be read and reread. We learn about living and dying from Wendell as we hear the voices of Port William recalling their commitment to the membership and their devotion to one another while being keenly reminded of the inevitable human frailties and limitations common to us all. The work of both Norman and Wendell has much that could be noted, but a central theme to which both of them call us is the significance of gratitude. And it is with great gratitude that we welcome both of them to Nashville and to celebrate the work of Siloam. Morgan has already mentioned Health as Membership, Wendell's 1990s classic piece that reminds us of the centrality of belonging and membership in a community if we are truly to be healthy. But likewise, as we seek to form healthy communities, I am convinced that, quote, it all turns on affection, end quote, borrowing from the title of Wendell's Jefferson Lecture in 2012. Wendell artfully weaves the interdependent threads of love and affection for the land with the flourishing of the membership into a tapestry of a healthy community. Good health care turns on affection, as does for the land, as does care for the land. Siloam Family Health Center is a place that embodies and bears witness to the significance of both belonging and affection for some of the most vulnerable among us. I cannot imagine a better team for exploration of our topic this evening, what makes a healthy community. Norman Wurzba is a dear friend and is professor of theology and ecology at Duke University Divinity School. He has authored and edited multiple books, with his most recent being Food and Faith, A Theology of Eating, with Cambridge University Press. And Norman has frequently provided commentary on Wendell's work through the years. Norman is widely looked to as an authority at the intersections of theology and ecology and is in great demand as a speaker. We'll hear more from him tomorrow morning, as Morgan noted, at St. George's Episcopal Church, where he'll present Food and Faith, A Matter of Health and Wholeness, in conversation with Professor Ellen Davis and Wendell. WendellBerry is an award-winning novelist, poet, environmental activist, cultural critic, and farmer. He's an elected member of the Fellowship of Southern Writers, a recipient of the National Humanities Medal, and was the Jefferson Lecturer in 2012. The Jefferson Lecture in the Humanities was established by the National Endowment for the Humanities in 1972 and is the highest honor the federal government confers for distinguished intellectual achievement in the humanities. He was also a 2013 Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and was named the recipient of the 2013 Richard Holbrooke Distinguished Achievement Award. Wendell is also the author of more than 50 books. I think his tendency to be prolific was indicated even when he was graduating from high school in 1952. He won the Oratory and Journalism Award from Millersburg Military Institute. What a great start. But you know, this Wikipedia-like description of WendellBerry covers many of his substantial honors, all of which are admirable. But I think such a description falls far short of capturing his soulfulness and his penetratingly perceptive and incisive lens for describing our shared human existence, in sickness and in health, in sorrow and in delight. He challenges us to understand the importance of neighborliness and a good visit on the front porch if we are to be a healthy people. We have much to learn from this neighbor from Kentucky, and we are profoundly honored to have him with us this evening. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Norman Wurzba and WendellBerry.
So can you all hear us? Are we turned on?
Am I turned on? I believe I am.
We're turned on.
Even I can hear me.
Wendell, it's a pleasure to do this with you tonight.
Well, thank you, Norman. It's always a pleasure to be with you. You haven't done me any harm so far.
That's good. Tonight we've got a variety of topics that we want to try to address, including obviously community and health. And we're going to intersperse our conversation with some poetry reading. And I thought a good way for us to begin is for you to read The Mad Farmer Flying the Flag of Rough Branch, the Seeds from the Union, because it is a poem that, well, I picked these poems because I especially like them, but I picked them because I think they hit on some very important themes that we need to cover. So how about if we start with you reading that?
I've written from time to time poems about a character called the Mad Farmer, and the title, the job description of the Mad Farmer is partly a joke because he's sane, and a sane person in a crazy time is going to be perceived as mad, of course, but he also has some reasons to be upset. The Mad Farmer, flying the flag of Rough Branch, secedes from the Union. From the union of power and money, from the union of power and secrecy, from the union of government and science, from the union of government and art, for the union of science and money, from the union of ambition and ignorance, from the union of genius and war, from the union of outer space and inner vacuity, the Mad Farmer walks quietly away. There is only one of him, but he goes. He returns to the small country he calls home, his own nation, small enough to walk across. He goes shadowy into the local woods, and brightly into the local meadows and croplands. He goes to the care of neighbors. He goes into the care of neighbors. He goes to the potluck supper, a dish from each house for the hunger of every house. He goes into the quiet of early mornings, of days when he is not going anywhere, calling his neighbors together into the sanctity of their lives, separate and together, in the one life of their commonwealth and home, in their own nation small enough for a story or song to travel across in an hour. He cries, "Come all ye conservatives and liberals who want to conserve the good things and be free. Come away from the merchants of big answers, whose hands are meddled with power, from the union of anywhere and everywhere. by the purchase of everything from everybody at the lowest price, and the sale of anything to anybody at the highest price. From the union of work and debt, work and despair. From the wage slavery of the helplessly well employed. From the union of self-gratification and self-annihilation, secede into care for one another and for the good gifts of heaven and earth. Come into the life of the body, the one body granted to you in all the history of time. Come into the body's economy, its daily work, and its replenishment at mealtimes and at night. Come into the body's thanksgiving when it knows and acknowledges itself a living soul. Come into the dance of the community, joined in a circle, hand in hand, the dance of the eternal love of women and men for one another, and of neighbors and friends for one another. Always disappearing, always returning, calling his neighbors to return, to think again of the care of flocks and herds, of gardens and fields, of woodlots and forests and the uncut groves, calling them separately and together, calling and calling. He goes forever toward the long restful evening and the croak of the night heron over the river at dark.
So if we're going to talk about community, we obviously can't do that in the abstract. The communities are always particular places, and as particular places, they are susceptible to all sorts of external influences that can either do them well or do them harm. And you've written a fair amount about some of the forces that have undermined community. Could you talk a little bit about some of what those forces are and what you see them doing now?
Well, I don't know exactly what started it or how it started. The advertising business has taken it up. Politics has taken it up. Education has taken it up. But we're surrounded now by voices telling us in various ways, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly, that whatever we've got is not good enough. And this goes from your automobile to your kitchen appliances, to your spouse. And so this has induced a terrible recklessness in us, which has made us a culture of migrants. It used to be that a part of etiquette when you met a stranger was to say where you're from. You don't do that anymore. Anyway, I don't, because I don't want to hear people say I'm not from anywhere. And that's frequently the answer. But there's something else too, and that is the obsolescence of people who have been replaced by technologies. This happened in the coal fields. The people in the Appalachian coal fields have never got over it. They were replaced by machines. It was probably even more sudden and harsh for the people in the cotton and cane fields in the South when the machines moved in. And thousands, hundreds of thousands of mostly black people were suddenly obsolete. And they go off into places they're unprepared to live, and they become problems to themselves, or they die. I became friends a long time ago. We were sort of classmates at Stanford. Ernie Gaines of Louisiana and I. And I've heard Ernie talk and mourn over the number of black men of his generation who died because of weapons, addiction, and so on. Just couldn't make it. So you move people out of situations where they are settled and more or less competent into situations where they become immediately dependent on public providers, experts. And of course, the dependence on experts is another force, but maybe that's enough for the time being.
Well, I'd like to pick up on what you said at the beginning about this restlessness that is in people, so that the places that they are in are not good enough. And you've written a number of Sabbath poems, and we'll come to this theme a little bit later, but what do you think has happened in our culture such that people do not find the goodness of their place as worthy of their attention, worthy of their affection and care, so that we are the people who, as you said at one point, are constantly on a search for El Dorado, always looking for some other place?
Well, one indication of that is our interest in violence. I don't look at screens. But if you fly a long distance on an airplane, you're apt to see a movie. I never did get the earphones, but I was, every time I'd be astonished at the violence, one violent act right after another. People, how can you expect people to be stimulated by things of ordinary goodness and beauty if they have to have that to wake them up? And then, you go to the automobile dealer to get your truck worked on. You're sitting there, you can't avoid the television if somebody else is there who wants to watch it. It's all sensation. It's all sensation. So I avoid these screens for one thing, because I'm interested in where I am, and I don't want that to be obscured to me. But what my own life has revealed to me is that my place, which is a very ordinary place, it hadn't got a waterfall, not a glacier, a big rock.
No explosions?
No
explosions?
No explosions, no lengthy vistas. But it's inexhaustibly interesting.
Tanya lives with you.
Inexhaustibly beautiful.
It's because Tanya lives with you.
It's what?
Because Tanya lives with you.
Well, that helps. Yeah, if it wasn't for her, I might have to have 2 or 3 wives.
How about the role of education in some of this formation that happens with people? I know that within the profession that I have as a university professor.
If it weren't for Tanya, I wouldn't even be here. I slid off that and made a light of it because I feel so deeply about it. That was the one securely right thing that I ever did was let her persuade me to marry her. But I think that my marriage is also inexhaustibly interesting and beautiful. Not all the time. I mean, she's very critical, but a lot of the time.
But the marital metaphor and practice is very important, the marital one, right? The image of the mode of marriage as a way of fidelity to a place and a community and a person functions in your work in so many ways.
Well, it's a great metaphor. To begin with, I mean, the idea of a lifelong devotion. And I'm saying this with the perfect awareness that it doesn't work for some people. Some marriages ought to end. Some marriages ought to never been made. But the idea of it is still a very rich idea, and it applies to a lot of things that are not marriage. The idea of a lifelong devotion that ends with death really invites this relationship to fulfill and reveal its richness, and it's extremely important. And that's another thing we've downgraded and depreciated, but people with the will can still do it, but you got to listen to the vows. It may be a good idea to read them beforehand, in fact.
So you've spent some time in higher education.
I did.
And one of the things that we can say, I think, with a fair amount of accuracy is that higher education is training young people not necessarily to despise the places, but to think that there's always some other place to move toward. And I wonder what sorts of things would you recommend for our educational system? We may have educators in the room. What sorts of things would you suggest to our teachers to help them understand the importance of something like fidelity to a neighborhood, to a community?
Well, the message to me throughout my education, sometimes it was overt and sometimes it was implied, was that I could never amount to anything coming from a little old place that I came from, such as I came from, if I stayed in it. And it took me a long time to get over that. When I was in New York, Tanya and I and our children were in New York in 1962 to 1964. And I got an offer to teach at the University of Kentucky and took it. And I had a good many literary friends at the time whom I respected, older people. And they thought that I was working my ruin. And I'm not saying that I didn't, but there's no control plot for a life. I have no idea what my life would be if I had not come back to this little nowhere place, as they put it, that I came from. But I did come back, and that's where I learned. You can learn a lot from the Gospels about neighborhood, and to me, it's the critical point in the Gospels. But I learned the practice at home. And I think that we've got to learn to orient our educational system toward that possibility of somebody becoming able in some discipline, medicine, law, whatever those professions are, teaching, and going home under the discipline of neighborliness, neighborhood, the good neighbor, to teach young people to go home and be good neighbors, work with their neighbors, help their neighbors. I don't have but one man's experience, one person's experience, but my experience has been that that's rich beyond telling. To live with people that you've worked with, you've swapped work with, you haven't. It was lovely. Tanya and I moved, at the time we moved back to Kentucky, we pretty quickly settled in the little town that both my parents, the neighborhood that both my parents are from, and their families owned back. And I already knew people there, and we moved into a neighborhood I was already acquainted with, and this group of neighbors, and my children and I swapped work with them. And the beautiful thing about it is that it was work without accounting. We never went to the field for any large job alone. We just never did. And at the end of the year, nobody knew who owed anybody what. It just didn't matter. The rule was that until everybody was done, nobody was done. We worked together. You see, the marriage metaphor is lying under that. One of my neighbors across the river in Owen County, the only boast I ever heard him make was that he'd worked on every farm on his road and had never earned a cent of money from it. So there's that suspicion of money that I think underpins the idea of neighborhood. If it comes to money, if it comes to accounting and settling up, it's failed.
But another important element in this that you're describing is this economic work connection, so that community that many people look for, this kind of attachment, can't really happen apart from the sharing of work together.
I think that's true. I think you know people very well if you've worked with them. And I'm talking about physical work. The work, I'm talking about the work that college is supposed to raise you above. Mm-hmm. Actually, I see most of our neighborhood are either old or dead. Most of them actually are dead now. But there are a few of us survivors. I see one of them occasionally. And we talk about what a good time we had. We worked very hard. And we shed a lot of sweat, but a lot of funny things were said. Some of them even repeatable. But the trick is that you've got to get the scale right. You can't do this beyond a certain scale. And I'm thinking a lot these days about scale and about the economic value of intangibles. So that if you are a livestock farmer, you got livestock, and you got the scale right, you know the animals, and you sympathize with them. And the trick, the comedy is, it pays. And if you get the scale wrong, as in these feedlots and animal factories, you don't have that advantage. You don't get the payoff. Same thing with neighborliness. If the Amish really practice this, they're my model. If you love your neighbor as yourself, you have a neighbor. And by the strict construction of that term, you have help. And that's an economic advantage. Christians who are purely church Christians think of neighborliness as a virtue, you see. But it actually pays.
Which raises, I think, important questions for something like the Siloam Family Health Center when you think about the kind of care that you want to provide to a community of people, that Siloam could attain a size in which they will no longer be able to provide the care because the aspiration has been to become big.
We thought about on our visit over there this afternoon. These are exceptional people because for some reason, in spite of all the the admonishments and enticements of our present world. These are people who are willing to sit down and give sympathy to people who have needs, who need sympathy, as well as relief from illnesses and so on. And I was thinking, watching that film, eventually these doctors who are not of the same races as the patients will become examples to those people who may eventually produce their own doctors, who will be even more members of their communities. I was talking to my old friend John Hall, who was a doctor, a small town doctor, a country doctor. And he can't quit because people think they own him. They love him, and they need to hear what he has to say about what's wrong with him, and so on. Well, see, that's the difference between being a community member, a neighbor, and being a professional. So, it's worth giving some thought to how we bring about this transformation of professionals into neighbors. People who've had education that really implied all along you're too good to associate with your neighbors. After all, some of them weren't.
It seems to me that the transformation you're talking about involves also a transformation in the way we engage, receive, welcome time. Because we live in a culture, of course, in which speed is highly prized, right? And I want you to read one of your Sabbath poems in which you talk about time and how we might better live into it.
See, you're sticking me with these old things. Maybe I don't agree with them anymore.
This one's not so old.
Here, you want to... Yeah, this is a poem that I've been writing for a good many years, about 35 years now. Poems that I call Sabbath poems, because the idea of a Sabbath, stopping to rest, really interests me, because I've needed to, for one thing. But they started out on Sunday morning walks and sits. So this is one of those. This is from 2010, and it comes from getting home weary from being away, traveling in airplanes and so on. But a fate to which I'm not suited. I've come down from the sky like some damned ghost, delayed too long in time and forced by fire and by machines, returned at last to this sweet wooded slope, well known before, where time flows on unencumbered as the wind. No man intended this. What came here as a gift we use for good or ill, for life or waste of life, but it is as it is. To the abandoned fields the trees returned and grew. They stand and grow. Time comes to them. Time goes. The trees stand. The only place they go is where they are. Those holy, patient ones who only stand and wait for time to come to them, who do not go to time, stand in eternity. They stand where they belong. They do no wrong, and they are beautiful. What more could we have thought to ask? Here God and man have rest. I've gone too far toward time, and now I've come back home. I stand and wait for light, flight weary, growing old, and grieved for loss of time. For loss of time's gifts gone, with time forever, taught by time a timeless love. I stand and wait for light to open the dark night. I stand and wait for prayer to come and find me here.
Can you speak about the role of art and imagination and how you think the faculty of imagination can help us live into community, to help us to see the places that we are in as places of our love and care?
Well, Norman, I've been preoccupied with that question for a long time, and you're very cruel to ask it. Because I've never been able to make it very simple or even very clear to myself. But imagination is based on that word image, something visible. To make visible is to imagine. And of course, the arts are involved with that. Music's a little different. I don't understand music well enough to talk about that, but the visual arts and the literary arts are arts of imagination that are endeavoring to bring about sight, to bring to light, to make visible our real condition. And our habit now is to try to make our real condition visible by statistics. But that won't help you see yourself in place, in the world, in your community, among your neighbors. And I suppose that I think that the work of an artist is to help people learn to make those things visible to themselves. To see where you are. Most people now don't know where they are because they haven't seen it, they haven't visualized it. To visualize where you are is to be moved one way or another. It's to be involved.
Do you think
and of course, this involves an imitation in the human mind of the imaging power in the mind of God. That's the way Coleridge understood it. That's the way I think other people have understood it. But it's to be taken very seriously.
Do you think that the economic forms that so much dictate our culture, right? The thinking of spreadsheets, GDP analysis, sorts of things like this, that they actually cloud our capacities to see, so that we cloud our capacity to see. So, for instance, Blake talks about cleansing the doors of our perception.
Cleansing the doors of perception.
And I remember once being in a meeting where economists presented many graphs to suggest that the future is very, very bright because the graphs indicate growth. And people in the room were scratching their heads because they wanted to say, have you not bothered to look around to see what's going on?
Well, that's like the doctor monitoring the meters and machinery rather than the patient. And you can understand this. To actually see a patient, I imagine, would be a costly business. I mean, you'd have to put out some sympathy. You might be hurt yourself to see the hurt that somebody else was suffering. This is the principle of living together. But it costs There's a cost involved. So
how do we help people move beyond spreadsheets, charts, graphs, so that they'll want to see?
I don't know how to answer that, Norman. I don't think, I don't know how to move a person to where they'll do something that I approve of, let alone people. I think you have to do the work the best you can. I think you have to be a responsible neighbor or ally with the people who are willing to be neighbors to you. I've never trusted evangelism. I grew up listening to a lot of evangelists, not voluntarily, but I heard a good bit of it. And I don't think that works. I don't. You can't make it plain enough at that pitch of voice, or in that slow. I got hung up here lately reading the Beatitudes. I read them over and over again. I never could memorize them. I tried to. I know what they are, but I can't get them in order. They don't have a logical order, I don't think. But that's an amazing passage. That's the first thing you hear Jesus saying in the Gospel of Matthew. He goes up on the mountain, and he sits down, and he starts saying, "Blessed, blessed, blessed." It's so quiet. This is not the kind of preaching I used to hear. It's so unearthly quiet, and by the time he got to the end, you know he's going to be crucified. He said all the wrong things already. Mm-hmm. All these unworthies that he's blessed. So, he didn't give an altar call. I'm taking this seriously.
But he has a vision of the world as a place where nothing less than our devotion and love for others is at the heart. And it seems that the structures, the institutional forces in our society make that kind of affection and attention difficult.
That's right. That's right, because of routines and systems and statistics and all that stuff that the experts deal in. But the scale is different then.
In one of your essays, you talk.
He was wandering around talking to people personally, mostly.
Yeah.
A few crowds.
In one of your pieces, you describe healing as conviviality. Conviviality is healing, you say.
So it's living together.
So talk a little bit more about conviviality.
Ivan Illich wrote a little book called Tools for Conviviality, Tools for Living Together. Ivan Illich is a man who thought it through. He's a very valuable man. Conviviality, like the idea of neighborliness, brings you very quickly. These are important terms because they bring you directly to practical matters. If you're going to be a neighbor to your neighbor, you've got to get beyond wishing him or her well. You've got to be able to do something, and do something is a practical business. It comes easy for doctors and professionals. They can do something. They have something they can do. But to actually help with work, Tanya knows more about this than I do. She's a better community person than I am. But you're being a neighbor, you're being convivial just by being in the world. You're living together with the other creatures and the other people. And so you come to the critical question, are you a good neighbor or are you not? And that is fascinating because it leads to very practical questions, and they're fascinating questions. How do you farm well? And if you don't farm well, you're going to be a bad neighbor. You're living poorly with your neighbors. So we go to the issue of land use, which has been my issue in a way, and I've had a lot of difficulty getting my allies and I have had a difficult time getting the alliances that we've needed. If you want to save a scenic place, you get allies. The so-called environmental movement will come and help you. But if you want to save the health of the farmland, they're not going to come. It's not interesting, and it doesn't become interesting until you get down to the actual work. I brought some statistics. In 1919, my county of Henry in Kentucky had 2,578 farms. In 2007, it had 962 farms. Now, you can't say that all the 616 farmers we've lost in less than 100 years were all good farmers. They weren't. I know they weren't. They weren't all good farmers. But they were there. They were in their communities. They were among their friends. They were settled. There was something to build on. Their children could have become better farmers with a little encouragement than they were. But they're gone. They're gone. They're refugees. They've been refugees in strange places, needing to start all over again. New neighbors, new doctors, the whole thing had to be started again. Now the point is, to me, that those people have been replaced by machines and chemicals. The chemicals are everywhere. This is the most threatening thing we've got now in land use. There are 85,000 chemicals in use today. 85,000 chemicals in use today. The EPA has tested 200 of them. Nobody knows where these are, or what they combine with, or what the effects are. There are peer-reviewed scientific papers that I've read that say glyphosate, which is Roundup's chemical, in too large quantities in a lot of Midwestern tributaries of the Mississippi River. Glyphosate or its degradation products. There are too many of them out there. I called up these guys. I said, what are the effects? They said, a lot of people would like to know. And the problem is that in very large volumes of water, to try to attach a cause to an effect is virtually impossible. And here's another statistic. Kentucky has 92,000 miles of surface streams. The Water Quality Branch of the state's Division of Water has 9 biologists. That's a ratio of 1 biologist to more than 10,000 miles of stream. So we've given up the people, they're gone. We've replaced them with chemicals, which can be monitored only by experts, but there are not enough experts to monitor them. They don't know what's going on. And this is the condition that we're in. So here's another statistic. In early April, our county got 8 inches of rain in a few days. And for the last 2 years, Midwestern corn and bean agriculture has moved into my county, whose topography is like this. I mean, they're planting soybeans on slopes as long as they can keep a tractor standing up. And that 8 inches of rain, I wish you could see it. You'd get your heart broken if you cared, if you could see it. Most people can't see those things, I think. That's the fix we're in.
It seems that what you're talking about is that we need to enlarge the context for what we understand health to be, so that we don't think about health in terms of individual bodies or even the health of a particular neighborhood in a city, that we need to be thinking about watersheds, ecosystems functioning far removed sometimes from where we actually are.
Well, you have this, here's a thing to try to imagine. You can imagine Siloam functioning as a healing, a company of healers, trying to bring about first bodily health. And they're doing this in a world that's totally contaminated, totally saturated with chemicals. Every time you breathe, every time you drink, you're poisoning yourself. So, what Siloam makes me think is, yes, that the word health, is an interesting word. It's related to heal, obviously. To heal is to bring somebody back to health. It's related to hail, it's in that phrase, hail and hearty. It's related to halo, whole. To heal is to make whole. All these words are the same family. And then finally, holy. And I was saying earlier in conversation, once you take hold of that particular string, there's no place to put it down. You've got to keep going until you begin to deal with the community these people are living in and the city these people's community is in and the state that the city is in and the country and finally the world. There's no way to confine this stuff. But I must say, I'll enter a little dissent here. I'm doubtful about global thinking. The problem is that nobody knows the globe. And it is possible to know competently part of it. And we have to know that this place is connected to every other place, but we can't take there are limits of responsibility, limits of understanding. This is why scale is so important. You've got to keep it. Well, I think you can say that you can scale medical cares in such a way that the whole doctor can have an effective relationship with the whole patient. And you can scale it so that that's impossible.
You mentioned that healing connects with the word holy, so I wanted to have a little bit of time for us to talk about the role of religion in the way we think of healing. And you've written a fair amount of how one of the great diseases of religion has been dualism, the elevation of the spirit at the expense of the body, or the soul at the expense of the body. How do you think spirituality might be a contributing part in the healing of communities and neighborhoods?
Well, as a part of my response to that duality, I quit using the word spirituality.
What's your better word?
I don't have a better word. But I think if you give that up, that's a very badly corrupted word. I mean, there are experts in spirituality and specialists.
And one of your criticisms is that it tends to the heroic, that spirituality is a way to escape from day-to-day affairs.
Well, it's a cheap heroism. It doesn't cost anything. And I think there was a kind of an economic principle that underlay a lot of the brands of Protestantism that I grew up with, which implied always that you would barter your body's life in this world, make a kind of sacrifice of it to your spiritual well-being hereafter. And that's terribly uninteresting, for one thing. It's a huge bore. We're after all, we're bodily creatures, and we don't understand what a pure spirit might be, or I don't anyway. I have to just drop out on that. I have not known any pure spirits. I'm very well acquainted with a lot of dead people, but they're still present to me as they were. And so I know that materialism is off. I mean, it just doesn't account for enough. It just leaves too much out. So I don't want to talk about a purely material reality, and I don't want to talk about a purely spiritual reality. And so I've been dodging those terms to try to deal directly, or more directly, more clearly, to do a better job all the time of dealing with life as I have experienced it. And life as I have experienced it is compounded of experience that I think of as heavenly. I mean, if it weren't, why would we worry about it, about heaven? And I think that I'm aware of things in our life here that are hellish. And if you're in bad enough shape, it can last a long time. The whole effort is to terminate those hellish times in people's lives. But sure, I don't mind using the term heavenly or hellishly or earthly, but I'm not going to have the argument limited by spiritual or material. That's all.
So you mentioned heaven, and so I have another poem for you to read.
You're going to do that.
I knew, yeah.
Well, this is the way I argue with myself. This is another Sabbath poem. I need three hands here. O saints, if I am even eligible for this prayer, though less than worthy of this dear desire, and if your prayers have influence in heaven, let my place there be lower than your own. I know how you longed, here where you lived as exiles, for the presence of the essential being and maker and knower of all things. But because of my unruliness, or some erring virtue in me never rightly schooled, some error clear and dear, my life has not taught me your desire for flight, dismattered, pure, and free. I long instead for the heaven of creatures, of seasons, of day and night. Heaven enough for me would be this world as I know it, but redeemed of our abuse of it and one another. It would be the heaven of knowing again. There is no marrying in heaven, and I submit. Even so, I would like to know my wife again, both of us young again, and I remembering always how I loved her when she was old. I would like to know my children again, all my family, all my dear ones, to see, to hear, to hold more carefully than before, to study them lingeringly as one studies old verses, committing them to heart forever. I would like again to know my friends, my old companions, men and women, horses and dogs, in all the ages of our lives, here, in this place that I've watched over all my life, in all its moods and seasons, never enough. I will be leaving how many beauties overlooked. A painful heaven this would be, for I would know by it how far I have fallen short. I have not paid enough attention. I have not been grateful enough. And yet this pain would be the measure of my love. In eternity's once and now, pain would place me surely in the heaven of my earthly love.
People here might be wondering, what can I as an individual do to help promote healthy communities? What sorts of things might you recommend to people that they do personally and then perhaps
Well, you know, that invites me to visit with all these people and make specific recommendations. But I think the instructions are clear enough about neighborliness. We've got the parable of the Samaritan. A neighbor is somebody who needs you, who needs your help, that's all. And of course, there's the neighbor who lives nigh you, which is where we get the word. And most of us don't pick them. There are such things as monasteries and other intentional communities, but most of us don't pick our neighbors. And this is a hardship because we're always better than they are. But this is where hypocrisy comes in. I'm beginning to be a big advocate of hypocrisy. I'm more serious than you think. Hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue, and I'd like to see more of it. Vice is getting entirely too self-sufficient and proud of itself to suit me. But you can't love your neighbor every day all the time, any more than you can love yourself every day all the time. So you have to know how to act as if you did. You see, this is where the hypocrisy comes in and plays a vital role. You may not love your neighbor. You may have a neighbor that's impossible to love, but you need to be able to act like you do. And I think the rewards would be pretty good for that. Maybe not tops. So, there's another thing that people need to do, and I think they need to try to do the real accounting of their own lives. Because I think this is a good exercise, because what that does, if you try it, is to lead you very quickly into the economic mystery that we are all living in. We're using products of which we don't know the cost, the human cost, or the ecological cost. For instance, we installed a couple of years ago 3 rather large, and Tanya says ugly, solar panels. Well, I'm gifted for self-righteousness, and it would be easy for me to feel good about that, except when I tried to do the accounting, and I can't do it. I don't know. I mean, they are saving. And I'm willing, my position now is that I'd give $2 any day to keep the energy corporations from getting 1. So there is a payoff, and it's a wonderful thing to go out to that meter and see it running backwards. But I don't know what the ecological cost of those solar panels and all the wiring and so on might be. West Jackson tried this with a farm, and it finally, I think, became ultimately impossible to account for the ecological cost of running a farm. I mean, if they had to have a part, calculate the ecological cost of manufacturing the part, plus the cost of the gasoline it took to go to town and get it, plus the depreciation or the wear and tear on the vehicle. You see how it can go? So the answer to that, of course, is to shorten the supply lines, make it more direct. And then the accounting might become a little bit more possible. But this is, I think, the way we've got to think. So that's some ideas.
All right. We wanted to leave some time for people to ask questions from the floor. So if you have a question, could you please stand up, and I will have some trouble seeing you. Please speak your question clearly and briefly, and I'll repeat it so that everyone can hear it, provided that I heard it first.
Normal, repeat it so I can hear it. The last time I drank martinis, but let's just settle for happy. There are a lot of things that make me very happy. I live, as I say, in a place that's very beautiful to me. And Tanya and I have spent many years calling each other to look out the window, for instance, at the way the light looks. We live in a river valley. And the light's always changing. Sometimes it's incredible. Things like that. I'm a sheep breeder in a small way. And when my animals are thriving, I'm happy. It makes me happy. It makes me deeply happy. I'm happy in my work. I've liked the work I've done. Sometimes it's made me miserable, but there's a great happy pleasure in going to work on something you sort of know how to do. I like to clean up messes. I don't do it very often, but I like to wash dishes because there's no worse mess than a bunch of dirty dishes. And what reassures me and makes me happy about that is that you start in this dreadful mess and do one dish or one piece of silverware at a time, and first thing you know, it's all straightened out, clean and in order. And for the same reason, I like to straighten up a mangled woven wire fence. It just looks impossible. And you start in, and you work a little here and a little there, and finally you've got a fence again. And it's just enormously satisfying to take something that's broken and make it work. I'm not a very good mechanic or fixer, but occasionally I succeed. And I'm just tickled to death. I don't know whether I'm delirious or not. How would you know? How would you know if you're delirious? You doctors need to go to work on this. I may have been deliriously happy and didn't know it.
The question is whether the story of Hannah Coulter was based on anyone that Wendell knew.
Well, if I'd never known any women, no, not any particular person, but I knew and cared greatly about a number of women of her generation and time and place and work. And I honor them. And well, I started to think about Hannah Coulter in January of 1960. And so she'd been around that long, and I'm sure she was informed by people, my knowledge of other people, of actual people. But you can start with an actual person, but you never know enough. That's why you have to imagine. So eventually, even if I had started with a particular person, I would have wound up with Hannah Coulter, who would have been a different character. But I was kind of in love with her, and I began to hear her talk, and so.
There was a question out here somewhere. Yeah, how important is silence for you?
Oh, very important. I have, for a happily married man, spent a lot of time alone because the kind of work I've done has required it. And so quieting down so that you can actually hear what's going on in your mind or your heart or your soul or whatever organ we're speaking of, you've got to be quiet. You can't. It won't happen if you're surrounded by people and making noise, or it won't happen for me that way. It's come from the quiet, and always there's always a decline. My long experience with language has taught me that it's always inadequate. And so what a writer is doing always, I think, is to try to do the best you can with an inferior product. I don't know. What made me turn really kind of, I suppose I'd always had a kind of a religious turn, but what sort of verified it for me was that the experience of having things come to me, inspiration. Where does it come from? I'd be a fool to try to say, because I don't know, but it does come. All of a sudden, something is with you that wasn't there before. And that matters to me immensely.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking WendellBerry for being with us.
Let's welcome Andrew back to the stage. Andrew, thank you so much.
Well, there's a guy named Frederick Law Olmsted who is the landscape architect for Biltmore Estate and for like a few big other Central Park in New York City. Yeah, it's kind of a big deal. And I remember reading about him one time, and it talked about how he used trees and shrubbery and flowers as his paints. You know, when he saw a hill, it was the canvas. And I remember reading about how he planted certain trees in Central Park, knowing that his work of art wouldn't be complete until long after he had died. That he said it would be 70 years before this thing that I've envisioned is going to grow into the thing that I want it to be. And I think that's kind of what Siloam is doing. They're planting trees. They're investing in human beings and building community in a really beautiful way. So I wrote this song for my wife to thank her for the way she loves our children well. So here you go.
We chose the spot, we dug the hole, we laid the maples in the ground to have and hold. As autumn falls to branches out and bless the dawn. These trees will spread their branches out and bless someone.
Well, once again, on behalf of the board, the staff, and volunteers of Siloam, thank you so much for coming tonight. Let's return a word of thanks. I invite you to pray with me. Heavenly Father, our first word is always a word of thanks to you. We are grateful for the gift of life, for the gift of life in Christ Jesus, for the gift of gathering this evening, for the gift of being associated with the ministry through Siloam. We pray, Lord, that you would increase our benefactors and deepen our ministry. We thank you for all that we've heard tonight. Lord, we pray that you would make visible in our imaginations what it is to be a healthy community, a holy family, your sons and daughters living as neighbors. Help us, Lord, always to see the place where we already are, to regard the people with whom we are already in relationship as inexhaustibly interesting. And Lord, between now and whenever we lay our heads down for sleep, we ask that you would create some space that we would be intentional, expressing gratitude for the blessings of this day that is now passing, and also to be mindful of those things today that did not bring blessing, perhaps diminished, and to release them to you. May the measure of our lives, what will save us from unreality, be found in the depth of our love and in our capacity to suffer as people of hope. In the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.